So now we're going to do an application using substitution. Okay, so remember, when we're solving applications, we have some guidelines we're going to follow. First of all, we're going to read our problem very slowly, more than once. Even the best math people cannot understand a word problem from the very beginning, from the very first read. If you read a math problem the way you read a newspaper article or something, you'll never understand it. So you've got to read it extremely slowly, phrase by phrase, and take it in. So don't expect too much. Read it slowly and read it again. Then, part two, step two, is to put yourself in the problem. Use your imagination. Think about it. Let it mull over in your mind a little bit. Try to see what's going on. Okay? Use that imagination. Then, only then can you be able to really do the math. And the first part of the math is to define your variables. Make sure you understand what the missing numbers are in your problem. What is the actual question they want you to answer? What might those numbers look like? Define your variables. And then, step 4, we're going to write equations. Equations are just mathematical expressions or mathematical relationships between these missing numbers. You know something about it, and so we've got to get some mathematical relationships for these missing numbers. Then we're going to solve them. Once we have the two equations that we have to do, we will solve it using substitution or another method later on. These that we're going to do right now, we're going to solve using substitution. And then you're going to check your answer. Your answer has to make sense. If the question happens to be, how many apples do you have? And your answer is -6, well, something might be wrong because you're not going to have a -6 apples. That doesn't make sense. So let's read our first example. Here we go. During the 2009 Major League Baseball season, the Dodgers played 162 games. Wait a minute, let's think about it. There's no baseball right now. Baseball's kind of been postponed and maybe even canceled. So let's just reminisce on how awesome baseball was. In 2009, the Dodgers played 162 games total. They won some, they lost some. I love baseball. Let's keep reading. They won 28 more games than they lost. Wait a minute, they won 28 games? No. What a horrible season. No, let's read it again. They won 28 more games than they lost. Okay, so think about that. They won 28 more games than they lost. That means the win number is a big number and the loss number is a smaller number. They had a winning season. And then what was the question? Last sentence says, what was their win-loss record that year? Well, that brings us to what they asked for. They want to know how many wins they had and how many losses they have. So what I'm going to do is I like to use the actual numbers, the actual letters. I'm going to let W equal the number of wins, and I'm going to let L equal the number of losses. Okay, and you can use X and Y if you want to, but X and Y are generic. And so this way I'm using the words and just using letters, and it's okay. If you want to use X and Y, go for it. But just make sure you write down which one is which, because when you get to the end of the problem and somebody asks you how many wins, and you're like, I don't know, is that X or was that Y? So write it down at the beginning. Okay, so step 3, define my variables. That's what I just did. I stated my variables. I have wins and losses. All right, step 4, write equations. These are mathematical relationships between the wins and the losses. Okay, so you've got 2 of them that you have to do. You've got 2 sentences. Each one represents an equation. first one says the Dodgers played 162 games. Some of those were wins, some of those were losses. But the total, hint, hint, was 162 games. And so that's going to be the W plus the losses had to total up to equal 162. That made sense. It's a little tricky. The second one says they won 28 more than they lost. They won 28 more than they lost. Okay? So what that means is the win number is bigger. The win number is bigger than the loss number. And that's going to be important. So the win number is the big one, and it's the loss number plus 28. Because the win number is the big one. And there's my problem. This is my problem. And now I just use my solving that I got. Solving that I know how to do is substitution. I didn't even spell that right. I just saw that. Substitution. Okay. So remember, in substitution, we were looking for an x equals or a y equals. So in this case, we've got a w equals. W equals that. And I'm going to substitute it into the other equation. This is what it's going to look like. It's going to have w plus l equal 162. And I'm going to put in this spot, I'm going to take that out. And in its spot, I'm going to put l plus 28 plus l equal 162. Why that's doing that. It's aggravating. So that gives me 2l plus 28 is equal to 162. Subtract 28 on both sides. I'm using my algebra. And I'm going to have 4, 134, and divide both sides by 2. And I'm going to get L is equal to 67. So that's 67 losses. So how many wins? Well, since you understand that wins plus losses equal 162 minus 67 will give you my wins. Is that right? That's right. Get 95 wins. So 95 wins and 67 losses. I hope that's right. Does that add up to 162? I think so. 162 minus 67, or 67 plus 95. Yeah, that does. Alright, so now the question was, what was their win-loss record? Well, the wins was 95, and the losses was 67. So that's my answer. It was a 95-67 record. That's a winning season, which was what we knew it was going to be. Okay? Alright. Think it through. We'll try another one in a little while.